I'm excited about tonight. I can't imagine a book that really brings together the topics we've explored over these last 8 months. From Gangsters of Capitalism, we started in September. We have some essays that talk about capitalism and being outside of being in margins, a white mosque, and in between places, Sophia Samatar and Lucy Bryant, even to Dr. Grayson's book, After, where we talked about our connection with the natural world and all of us around us. So this book, Solastalgia, ties so many of those threads into one space. So I'm really excited that we're ending our live season of Books and Brews here with Solastalgia. And also, of course, April is National Poetry Month. Poets are in the house. And Earth Day. So how better way to appreciate the earth than to actually express a little grief, possibly, and gratitude. So without ado, I'm going to introduce our amazing panel of authors here. Paul Bogard, right here, returning to Books and Brews. Maybe a very familiar face to you all. He is JMU professor here from 2012 to 2020. So he's on a return trip, just flew in from Minnesota today. Is the author of The End of Night, Searching for Natural Darkness in an Age of Artificial Light. Was a finalist for the Penn E.O. Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. He also has a coffee table book, To Know a Starry Night, and the children's book, What If Night. He is now an associate professor of English at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Do we have any Midwesterners in the house? Yes. He is here tonight, of course, to talk about his most recent work as editor and contributor to Solastalgia, an anthology of emotion in a disappearing world. We also have, there are over 34 contributors, essays to this book, and we have 2 in the house tonight from our own JMU. Erica Cavanagh, right next to him, grew up in Rochester, New York, and served in the Peace Corps in Benin. Her writing has appeared in the Missouri Review, North American Review, Off Assignment, The Journal, and elsewhere, and she teaches at JMU in creative writing. We also have joining us Lauren K. Allen. Did I say that right, Lauren? That works. She's the author of 2 poetry collections, Difficult Fruit and Honey Fish, as well as the co-editor of Furious Flower, Seeding the Future of African American Poetry. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and many other publications. Born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago. Tobago, thank you. I'm a reader, not a speaker. Sorry, Matt. Lauren lives here again in Harrisonburg, and she's professor of English at JMU and executive director of Furious Flower Poetry Center. Let's give everyone a warm welcome. Yay. So tonight, we're going to do what we always do, which is ask some questions and then leave room for you all to ask questions. This is a conversation amongst all of us. I'll start with Paul. 6 years ago, you were here for Books and Brews. We had standing room only and on February 14th, talking The End of Night, but you talked about the word solastalgia and how you felt there was something that had to be said about that. And I'm just asking, really, how did this evolve from your voice to bringing an anthology of 34 writers to talk about this?
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, thank you all for being here. This is really great. And it's really so wonderful to have Erica and Lauren up here with me too. And so thanks for this. It was during the time I was doing research on my book, The End of Night, that I discovered the word solastalgia. It had been coined by an Australian philosopher. And at the time, for me, I was researching the value of metaphorical darkness. So times when we can't see well metaphorically, we can't understand something, we can't make sense of something, we're feeling anxious, we're feeling grief, sadness, that kind of thing. I was doing that research, and when I found that word, solastalgia, meaning the homesickness we feel while we're still at home, or the desolation we feel about a loved landscape, seeing it be destroyed, that kind of thing. It was perfect for those that purpose, and I identified it in terms of its how it spoke to my grief at that point. Since then, though, it's really evolved to, and I've come to understand it as a word that's really rooted in love and our love for our places and our love for the animals and the birds that are around us. And yes, it does speak to a particular kind of grief, and that's really important, and we can talk about that as well. But I want to make the point right away that for me, the understanding has really evolved to where I think the word really was meant to be in the first place, which is it's about the love that we feel. If we didn't love our places and our fellow creatures, we wouldn't be feeling solastalgia or any other form of grief.
So how did we get 34 other people to contribute to this solastalgia?
Just sent them money. I mean, just...
I missed that email.
Yeah, it's coming. It was great. Part of the experience of putting together an anthology is getting to reach out to people that you really admire, writers that you admire and love, and invite them and just say, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what I'm doing. Do you have something to say? And I just got really lucky that people like Erica and Lauren said yes. And I left it pretty open. I let people write what they wanted to write about, and in the form they wanted to write, and then, like I said, I just got lucky. Few people said no, but most people said yes. And I think that one of my greatest goals for the book is just to produce something that says to the reader, you're not alone, like that other people are feeling this way. And I think the fact that there are 34 writers who said yes and wrote these beautiful pieces is proof that if you're feeling solastalgia, you are not alone.
Okay, Erica and Lauren, now's your chance to comment on that. You didn't get the check?
No check. But I mean, we didn't really become writers, I don't think.
I'm a poet. There's definitely no way I came into this for the check.
For the money. We're celebrating National Poetry Month this month.
We'll take that.
So I guess the question is, how did that question come to you? And what was your response when Paul reached out about writing about solastalgia?
I will say that as a writer, I think one of our jobs is to put language to feeling. And I did not know the word until I got the email asking me if I wanted to write about that word. But what I felt was immediately triggered was its closeness to nostalgia, right? And so as a person who's from somewhere else, every time I go back home, and maybe I'll read a little bit about what home was, it's different. And so that sense of nostalgia, but adding to that nostalgia, the grief and the place that is the word solastalgia, immediately I was like, yeah, man, I have things to say about this.
For me, I've lived long enough to see many places change many times over. But as soon as Paul asked me, I thought, okay, well, where did I really get my first ecological education without knowing that's what it's called? And I was thinking about how from about ages 2 through 5 each summer, my maternal grandmother would take us to a place called Pemaquid. It's in Maine. And back then, at least my grandparent let me wander off to the rocks jutting out into the ocean, which my own 6-year-old is here, and I'm not really sure I would do the same. But it was important, that she let me wander because I discovered tide pools that way and saw my first real ecosystem. Although to me, I was like, I'd only seen aquariums, which are in a way, they're artificial, right? We construct them. But this was real, and there was something really different about seeing animals, undomesticated animals in the wild that really struck me. There were starfish, there were snails, periwinkles, there were crabs. And I was also discovering the real shyness of those animals and discovering how large I was compared to them. And when you're 2 and 3 and 4 years old and you feel pretty small, it's pretty big to realize that other things are much smaller. And I'll just say, in terms of loss, I went back to Pemaquid for the first time in my mid-20s, and I went to that same place. Speaking of nostalgia, I was trying to grab onto something after 9/11, and that's when I went to grab onto a place that I loved, only to discover that the tide pools were gone and covered in seaweed. And, all that remained were barnacles, which are alive too. We shouldn't ignore the barnacles. But of course, I felt the loss, and I immediately started researching what happened, to this landscape. And instead of going on and on, I won't say much more except to say what happened was that the starfish moved north, and we see that with a number of marine life, is that they're disappearing from more. It's not even that South Maine, but they are disappearing from southern places, and they're a little farther north now.
So the word solastalgia, you guys have said nostalgia. It begs, when I've held this up to people, that's the first thing that I get is, what is the definition? What is that word? And all throughout the book, the essays kind of put a new play on that definition. I've marked them if I need to read them, but I'm hoping not. So I just want to ask, really, for each of you, what is the definition and what it means to you? I think you've answered it somewhat in just responding to the writing, but if you could give us, Paul, you'll have to go to the real definition of solastalgia.
I'll just read the first paragraph of my introduction because it speaks right to this question. The distress caused by environmental change, the homesickness we feel while still at home, the lived experience of the desolation of a much-loved landscape. All of these are ways that Glenn Albrecht has defined the word he created to describe this emotion so many feel in response to finding our beloved world so impacted, under threat, and certain to suffer radical change. To feel solastalgia is to feel pain, sorrow, and grief, but it is also to recognize that the source of this pain is our love for the places of which we're part. And in that love lies the energy to defend the world we've known and to create the future we want for our children, grandchildren, and those who will follow. So, and I guess I would say we distinguish solastalgia from nostalgia in the sense of nostalgia being about the past and a place that we were or an experience we had in the past. And solastalgia is the pain we feel when we look around where we are right now and we see it changing around us right now. So we're losing the place that we love. We're losing the solace that nature has provided us for forever, essentially.
Is that the definition that you were working off of as well?
Paul did provide us with a definition. And as I said, I immediately thought of the tide pools, but I do also think of, what is our responsibility now for trying to preserve places? And one of the ways that I guess I try to do that, and it's in a simple way, but in a way that I think is pretty significant, is in just knowing the names of things in nature, which is something that I learned from that same maternal grandmother whose name was Ruby, who took us to Maine. She was my real role model for just even knowing, cardinals, robins. She had a full yard of hollyhocks and, lady slippers. And wherever we went, no matter whose garden we went to, and she lived near Emily Dickinson's house, we would go to her garden when the garden reopened, because it hasn't been open forever. But when it reopened in the 2000s, she could name, all the flowers and the trees. And by then I was a grown-up, and I felt that I should really step up. And I knew some names, but that I should really pay attention. And I think that's really her legacy to me. I have a daughter here today who turned 6 today. And just even, I saw her looking around. And, I was thrilled even just as we were sitting out to dinner, she looked out the window and she goes, "Ooh, a cardinal." And she's like, "Is it a cardinal?" And I was like, "Yes, it's a cardinal." And so that's some modeling we do, is naming, the cardinal or pointing out to her. We have a magnolia tree outside our front door, and there's a big robin's nest in our magnolia tree, and she can spot that too. And she can spot that the robin used straw that we use for our chickens, because we have 4 backyard chickens, and so we have straw for them, because they like to nest and be in the hay. And the robins took our, they're a little bit magpie-ish. They'll use whatever there is. So they took the hay and they made this whole nest. And that she can name those things and do that. For me, that's important, and it's a way to not take for granted what is, as if we live some kind of generalized life. Like, each life is pretty precious, and there is no other of a species. And so I think, Paul was pointing to that kind of responsibility. I can't quote you exactly there what you said, but I know it was there.
Call to action. How about you, Lauren?
Well, I think that one of the things that spoke to me was the idea of loss. And I know it's not supposed to be, but this harkens back to my mother being like, "Can you write happy poetry?" I'm a poet of loss. It's a thing. I don't know. And so for me, I know it was about like the love for place, but like you said, that the elegy and the love poem are hitched together. They're joined by love. And so the reason loss is felt is because love is there. But so for me, the idea of losing was the thing that really spoke to me in the definition. And of course, which then begs the question, well, what did it mean to have had the thing, right? And so, and then to be in the moment of it and having that experience, both of feeling the loss and being in the space, like I think that was a really potent combination.
Hard to hold both of those pieces, but kind of what you keep coming across in these essays is that you are holding multiple things, loss and love. And you value it because you love it, and you grieve it because it is no longer. There's a quote that keeps kind of popping up in all these essays, and I just want to read it. You all may know Aldo Leopold, pretty much in this room. "One of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Much of the damage inflicted on land is quite invisible to laymen. An ecologist must either harden his shell or her shell and make believe that the consequences of science are none of his business, or he must be the doctor who sees the marks of death in a community that believes itself well and does not want to be told otherwise." That's 1949. So did you feel some of that responsibility And it's not a very popular place to be in, Paul, as far as being almost a prophet, bringing not such good news. I guess my question is, did you have that kind of a feeling? And do you feel that this book maybe addresses things? One of the things Aldo Leopold talks about, and you brought up, is that by being so grief-stricken, you're not able to communicate. You're kind of lost in the muttering darkness, So the question is, do you feel like this is a different way in which to kind of get across climate crisis in a new way?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think that ultimately, I'm sitting here feeling like, man, I overemphasized the love thing. Because really, at the heart of this is certainly acknowledging and engaging with the loss that's happening around us, and that ultimately the word solastalgia comes from our recognition that we are losing so much of the life that's around us. And I want people to engage with that reality. I want them to recognize that fact and feel the grief, feel sadness. And also, right, let that be not the end of the question, let that be the start, sort of where to next, right? So I am emphasizing that the reason we feel this is because we love something, but to avoid our grief or to avoid the reality of these losses is we're doing way too much of that right now. However we can engage with the reality of what's happening, and it's not only, there are a lot of ways in, right? But to recognize the reality of what's happening and to take action in whatever way we can. We don't have any more time to waste.
So I thought one of the things that, this is a poem that ends my piece, but it's a poem that I remember writing very clearly because I'm from Trinidad. Have I mentioned that? I lived in Iowa for a time. It's very cold there. It's like really inhospitably cold at times. You put clothes on top of your clothes, right? So then there was this day, right, that was not in the middle of November. And I remember being like, yes. And then I thought, what does this mean? Right. And so that idea of the conflicting emotions of like, was, and again, I have a student here, hey, Ella, of what drives the poem. Sometimes it's, again, trying to name and not to be outside of complicity, right? Because I think we love to be like, I'm good. And I was just like, oh crap, I'm not good. And this is not good, even if it feels good, right? And so this poem emerges, trigger warning, it's not a happy poem, but it's okay. It's called Trojan Sun, a Meditation. It's fall on a winter day, and my island heart beams like a sunflower awash in welcome light. But the dizzied roses of my small garden, caught between wither and bloom, remind me November thunder and short-skirt winters mean our planet is off kilter. That a mild day in Iowa shows up oceans away as epic, unnatural disaster, entire villages razed to splinters by wind and water, the shifts in weather around our globe, sometimes slow as evolution, sometimes more Big Bang for our brazen disregard than we'd bargained for. Already, it's too late for so much. The ozone layer, disappeared rainforests and ecosystems, our dying oceans, the 1,000 species gone extinct on our watch. But here, it's a November morning, and from a clear sky, the sun halos the bare trees with light bright as fool's gold. Tomorrow, winter returns, dark and dank in tow. For now, the beauty of it all fills my heart to breaking as I head out into our numbered days. It's all of it.
Thank you, Lauren.
All the feels.
That is the loss, but it's the truth. You do have to start with sorrow. I'm from Iowa, by the way. So. We won't go there. And speaking just to the organization of the book, you, Paul, divided this into 5 sections, and it starts with grief is part 1. Part 2 is remember and imagine. Part 3 is love, get angry and love some more. Part 4, bring new life into a disappearing world. And take 5, take action and take care. Did these sections evolve as you received the essays? And I guess the question is going to move on to you all is, did you expect to be in the section that you were put in with your essay?
Yeah, the titles of the 5 sections answer that question of what can I do, right? So starting again, if we start with we are feeling this natural emotion, natural reaction to what's happening around us, to the places in the life that we love. We feel that grief, then where to next? What can we do? And so I wanted to offer some options, right? And this is where kind of the experience of creating the anthology does take a little bit of a life of its own, because, for example, the question, the 3rd section, which is love, get angry, and love some more, was not, I don't have my essay in that section, because I'm a good Minnesota kid. I never really learned how to be angry, which is very frustrating. And I got some really awesome essays where people were really angry and they talk about that. And I loved that. And so, that helped make that section. And then my essay is in the section with Erica's, which is bring new life into a disappearing world. We both talk about being parents to young children. One of the reasons I wrote this book is because I have a almost 5-year-old now. And if you look on the opening, I always have to be careful when I go to this part of the book. When you look at the dedication is for Amelie, my daughter, that we loved this world. That idea that I just want her to know that we were trying everything we could think to do now. So that section is about being a parent, and then the last section is take action and take care, which is take action is a little bit straightforward. You've probably heard about that, but take care is also important in terms of taking care of ourselves so that we can, as they say, live to fight another day, right? You have to, and there's some great essays in there about how to do that. So some of the organizing ideas I had in mind, I thought I would get essays on certain things, but then as in so many good creative endeavors, the organization kind of took on a life of its own as I started to get these great essays and see like, wow, okay, cool, that could go here, that's part of the fun. So,
did I know I'd be in the bringing new life,
Yes.
the hopeful section? I have been accused of being a glass half full person before, so I wasn't shocked. I think it's just naturally what goes when you're talking about being a parent. And, I do a lot of thinking about, and I think this was true even before I was a parent, because I was thinking back on what our grandmother did for us, that, the past is also the future. What happens in the past and the future, but it's like I have a responsibility to the future, whether I had a child or not. It's just that having a child kind of makes that more intense. I'll just be honest about that you have this responsibility to try to mitigate the damage without denying that there is damage. There is damage done. There's damage that's going to continue to be done. So this isn't a rose-colored glasses thing, but it's also that, sometimes I will just say often I also have James Baldwin in my head. And a James Baldwin line that often comes to me is he says, I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. And, I relate to that to the degree I can as a woman, and that I'm here, that I'm lucky I'm here. I'm lucky that I can, that I have a daughter. And so, the way that I face forward in life is to say, okay, well, what can I do? What kind of education can I bring to my daughter? What kinds of ways can I take care of the earth? And I'll just mention one other author who is a big teacher of mine, and I'm sure her name will be familiar to many of you, and it's Robin Wall Kimmerer, who I'm actually teaching in a class tomorrow. And one of the things she talks about in terms of repairing, doing the repair that we can, is also about knowing names of places in the natural world, but also a relationship of reciprocity, of understanding that we have to engage in a mutual kinship with, all the creatures of this earth. And ways that we can do that, and that we do it in our own yard, are things like, we have milkweed for, our bees, for our pollinators. And, we have red flowers that hummingbirds really like. And it's just honestly also a nice feeling to see bees, to me, and hummingbirds in your yard, and to see creatures happy. And those are just kind of can-do things toward healing and repair.
Your essay was called "What the Living Do," so that fits all of that. How about you?
I'm just happy I wasn't in the grief section for once. No. No, I mean, it's one of the great things of not being the editor of the anthology, right? Is that you send off your thing and it comes back looking like this, right? And you get to see what's around you and how that inflects and supports the work. And so in the section on remembering and imagining is where this piece is created. And I thought, okay, I just was like, I trust Paul, and I wanted to just see, it made me look at it again, right? Like, yes, this is about remembering, this is about imagining into and imagining out of and imagining through. It felt more hopeful than I usually write.
Tell your mother. We're running over a little bit, so I'm going to put it out to you all for questions. If there's any questions, go ahead. Question of the human suffering that is along with the nature and the changing atmosphere.
The thing that jumps out to me, I actually literally teach a workshop on this. It's that we are nature. We're not separate from nature, right? The planet is dying, as are we, because we are part of the planet. So it's not a distinction for me, right? That one thing in one place is destroying. I mean, I'm from an island. We go to the south of the island and there's a house 2 miles out because the ocean is reclaiming the land. So I think that's one of the fallacies that allows us to disconnect, is that we are somehow we are too a species in the process of extincting ourselves, right? And so I think that for me is the first thing I would say is like, oh, it's not different. It's actually all the same thing.
Paul or Erica, do you have something to say to that?
I mean, I'll just say that that probably is one of the places where I do feel quite helpless and very privileged, particularly living here. I don't live on the coast. I don't feel my home threatened. And if my home was threatened, I do have the means to go elsewhere. As was mentioned in the introduction, I lived in Benin, West Africa for over 2 years and saw this firsthand. Benin borders the Atlantic in the south and the Sahara in the north. And the Sahara moves south several inches each year. There's a very natural rainy and dry season in Benin and in many countries close to the equator. But the length of the dry season at times has increased, which means for places that do not have running water, that depend on wells, it means that their wells are dry and they're dying from completely preventable diseases related to dehydration. So it's on my mind a lot, as it sounds like it is on yours. I wish I had a magic wand in that regard. And I'm also mindful what Lauren is saying is that there are people in this world who are more responsible for this crisis than others. And it is the Western world. And so I feel some responsibility, right? Well, I shouldn't say right, because I shouldn't assume that you believe what I believe, but I do feel responsibility for that, and also some helplessness before that. And I'll just leave that there, except to say also that I appreciate that you obviously don't look away.
Paul, did you want to add anything?
No, I love the answers from my contributors.
I will say that many essays are written where people are in the midst of fire. They're in the midst of everything changing. So it's hard to read those. It's hard to read all of that change. It's important to read it. The question is, inevitably species die. And when we die, do you have hope that the species that comes after will learn from our mistakes?
I'm sitting here being like, wow. Because I think that's such a writerly question, right? To think about what comes after while still living before the aftermath of that. And I also feel like, you have your daughter, I have a 7-month-old nephew. I also remember so many things in the head happening right now. I was at a poetry festival, a Dodge Poetry, and poet Philip Levine, somebody asked a really similar question. And that's like, we've been having this conversation for such a long time. He's like, I've got grandkids, I don't want to hear that, and, chewed out this audience member. He got really upset because he didn't want to imagine something that didn't include the world that he knew, right, for his grandkids. At the same time, I think that, again, like you're saying it, right? That's nature, right? Nature does what it's going to do. I think there is a difference, though, between being part of nature and annihilating it, which we're sort of, always straddling, I think. And I mean, that's the optimist, right? To hope that nature corrects itself as we evolve, that we learn something better. I mean, that's all we can hope for, or else, how do we get up in the morning otherwise? So I would like to hope that that evolution also means improvement, a better thing. I hope we're around to see it. I hope we're part of making it.
All right. These are these questions that I hesitate to answer. It reminds me, though, of I do have friends who say they don't feel such grief or anxiety because we're all going to die, but the planet will continue to live. That kind of thing. And that doesn't speak to me as a response at all. It doesn't speak to me at all about the grief that I feel, about all the beauty that I see around me, and people that are suffering and all that. It just feels so, I mean, it's interesting to think about the future, but it doesn't speak to me in the way that the immediate future speaks to me. What is my child's life going to be like? What are the things that I have loved that have been lost and that we're losing? So I don't know if that's exactly, I don't want to say what you were saying, but it does. Sometimes people, I think, avoid their grief and their anxiety and really engaging with the question by saying this sort of like, well, the planet will survive. And it doesn't do anything for me, that response. So.
It's funny. It made me think. I talk about the ocean in my piece, and my mother saying to me as a child, like, and correctly, I mean, she was trying to warn me that the ocean will take everything. It can absorb. It can take everything, right? So, and we are discovering that is so, but there are consequences, right, for that ability. So there is something that is. That assumption that the planet will survive because it's just that big and that infinite feeling to us as our little tiny selves, I think we're living the falsity of that. And so I also think that, right, like there's no guarantee of its survival, and certainly not if we participate in its destruction.
Is there somebody else you saw?
Over here.
Okay.
Two more.
The question is about hope and how the 60s were maybe different from 2020 and how we're facing our environmental crisis. What can we do? That's certainly for you, Lauren.
I'm not in the hope chapter, y'all.
But you're not in grief.
I mean, I think part of it is, what do you mean by hope, right? If we're all hoping that we can just go back to the world, how it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever, that isn't going to happen, right? That world is gone, is lost, and so much of what we still have now is going to be lost too. But I think there is real hope, and we're in the section on parenting. We have to have hope. I shouldn't speak for Erica. I have to have hope. Having a child, right? I have to have hope. But it's a hope that we can wake up, get to work, realize, and do all the things that science is telling us we can do right now to make things less bad than they will be if we don't do things now, right? That's not like, woohoo, hope, but it is important hope, right? There's every reason for us to engage with what's happening right now, be hopeful about what we can do, and shape the future in that way. But it's a different, I think sometimes people think hope like it'll all go away. That's not going to happen.
I mean, for me, what has really led my work since probably adolescence and the things that I get involved in is not to get too overwhelmed by big trends. Because if I thought, as I set out, because young people can be quite idealistic, I'm going to change the world or anything like that, I would really find myself in despair, because rarely does something change quickly. And so I think what I decided early on was that I was going to be, in no matter what work I've done, is really focus on individual relationships with people. What kind of teaching and learning can we do with one another, whether it's about social injustices or environmental injustices, and the two definitely overlap in many instances. What kinds of things can we do to make life better for individuals, each of us? And to me, the hope that I've had to hold on to, and I have seen change in that way, I should say, just in individual relationships. I mean, I'm a professor. I have been lucky enough to see my impact on some students, and I will say it's the minority of students so far as I can see, but it is some. And I know teachers have had an impact on me, whether they are professionally teachers or not. And my hope, I guess the hope that I've clung to, is just thinking, well, I'm not the only one doing that work. I have people at my side. I have a former teacher, Bob Burson, in the audience, who was my teacher. The people I'm close to are my teachers. And the hope I cling to is that collectively, all of us are teaching each other better ways to take care of each other. And I mean each other as humans, but also with our kin on this earth, the other creatures, the creatures who live on this earth with us. I also don't see us as separate, like Lauren.
I will say that the entire last section, there are multiple essays that really are diverse, that gives step-by-step instructions of what to do. I read that to my husband. And the other is looking internally. And so there's so many various ways in which we find that hope. And I appreciate those essays and those writings to help us all explore those. There was another question over here. How does writing and reading for all the folks in the room help us transform solastalgia into hope?
I mean, I feel as though that's what the effort of the book is, right? The idea of, if we think of language as tending to our internal landscape and our internal environments, and we, have these works that give us transformation in those environments and landscapes, the idealist in me, which maybe doesn't show up in the poetry, but is here, hopes that it can then transform into external action and care for external environments. But I think that's one thing that words can do, right? Like when we talk about being moved, right? You're one place and you're moved. You're in a different place. And if we move towards a place that is, hopeful and responsible and, outraged enough to act, that's what words can do. And that's why I'm peddling them.
Yeah, and I would guess that a lot of people in the room feel the way that I do, which is that I love reading. I love other people's words, and it's the way that I've experienced in my life, not feeling alone in a world of wounds. And so my hope, as I said at the start, was in creating this book, that it would be a book that acknowledges that, and that if you are feeling solastalgia, you realize that a lot of other people are feeling that way too. And in that community, there's a sense of hope, right? You don't feel the loneliness at the same time you're feeling the grief. So I want to create what I love. The reading and writing has been my life, and so I wanted to add to that, I guess.
Not muttering darkly, right? We have a few moments, so I didn't know if you all wanted to read. You've read a poem, but maybe another piece. We don't have very much time, but
okay. So the first section of my essay talks about the unfinished roof that my father had, which meant we had a flat roof you could walk upstairs to, but he wanted to build a second floor and it kind of never happened. And so it was like a step to the top of the house that was there for most of my life. And it was one of my favorite places because I would go and just lie down and look at the sky. And this poem comes out of that. It's called What Kept Us. Nights on the roof, the stars strewn out, careless as toys. The moon, the shy dark. There are dreams we can give to no one but the sky, that echoing house of present absent gods. I wish upon a universe lit by wanting. Downstairs, everything that has ever loved me lives on, calls me in, and to answer, yes, I'm coming, and to linger there on the flat roof, heart flung high.
that wasn't a lot of grief. That felt really good.
It's every once in a while.
Thank you.
Okay, so my essay does open with the tide pools, but then I shift to being here. So I'll just read a part of it. I live in Virginia now with my 4-year-old daughter. Each summer I take her to Assateague Island off the eastern shore. When the waves are long and low, we sit in the tide together. And when we need a break from the sun, we retreat to our beach tent and watch the nickel-sized holes in the sand. Those holes are where the ghost crabs have burrowed long, slender tunnels. We watch them from off to the side so we can see how they come out, cautiously, first as one protruding eye like an alien periscope, and then 2 eyes and a few fingerling legs edging out like a child half hiding behind a door. The crab scuttles back and forth, hide-and-seek style. Now you see me, now you don't. My daughter giggles. Why don't the baby crabs come out, she asks. I tell her they're small and we're big. They know they could be trampled or plucked up by a seagull, so they're being careful. I don't know how she hears the things I say, but I do know, in the words of botanist and writer Robin Wall Kimmerer, that, quote, being a good mother means teaching your children to care for the world, unquote. Observe each life as having a purpose and each life as having something to teach us. My hope is that she'll come to understand that the fate of our mutual lives resides in possessing the humility to measure our own scale and possible impact on one another and govern ourselves accordingly. Back home, after a bath, my daughter plucks her plastic toy crab from the drained tub, puts the crab in a cup and fills it with water. Crabs can't live without water for very long, she tells me. I smile at my little animist.
And I'll just read a little bit from my essay in the piece here about becoming a father. Almost 4 years ago, I became a father. My daughter was born during what sometimes seems like the final years of the world I've known, and the changes predicted for her lifetime are overwhelming. But I knew this when I chose to become a parent. What I didn't know was how being a father would be better than I could imagine, and my love for my daughter greater than any I've felt before. It's this love that I'm thinking of now in the epigraph of a favorite book, Jim Harrison's novel, Dalva. We loved the earth, but could not stay. It works the other way too. We know we cannot stay, but still we love the earth. Or, as Solastalgia would tell us, we cannot stay in the world we love, for that world is being radically changed by forces beyond our control, and still we love. The question for me, the question Solastalgia asks, will be how? What will it mean to love the living world, lake, loons, daughter, and on, when so much of that world is being destroyed? Of this, I'm sure. Love is the emotion that leads to every other: fear, grief, anger, happiness, joy, hope. It is the emotion to trust and follow as we find our way. We begin with water. We begin with water and sky, or mountains, or desert, or trees. We begin with animals, or birds, or seasons, or the sea. We stand under the stars, absorbing their light. We feel the small hand in our own, the bones like those in a bird's wing fanned, the fragility and the growing strength both. Alive now during this turbulent time, we do what we can and do all we can. We remember what was, imagine what could be, and learn to give thanks again and again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just felt like with that question of readers and writers. We needed to hear the words of you all. So I really appreciate you being here tonight. I appreciate all of you all and these conversations. The books are available. Books that we had all season were brought tonight too. So if you missed one of our conversations, you could pick up one of those too. And the authors, contributors will be here to sign all of their specific parts. So once more, let's give them a hand for being here.